Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of our podcast. And I'm not saying the name because we have, for those of you that didn't catch our last episode of season 1 in 2025, we have officially rebranded our podcast. We are now no longer Dental Disruptors podcast, but we have pivoted to Dental Operations Unpacked. And we are here with a returning guest. This is a good friend of ours, colleague, teammate at Kolla, Jordan Trenticosta. Jordan, thanks for joining us again. It's always great to have you and get to share your knowledge with all the people that listen to our stuff. So thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Before we get started, I want to give everybody a little bit of context around the rebrand and why we did it and what we're hoping to get out of season 2 and focusing a little bit more on operations. Clint and I, as we wrapped up 2025 and season 1, we talked a lot about what we gained and what we enjoyed most about the podcast experience, what we learned. And one of the things that we both agreed on was how awesome it was to get to know people and hear their stories and have them share their knowledge, and in particular around operations and all the best practices and technology and things that are out there. So we wanted to niche it down a little bit, get a little bit more specific to our audience and really speak to operators who are people that we work with on a regular basis, who we've worked with, prior to Kolla, even in our time at Weave. And we felt that it's a little bit of an underserved market. There's not a lot of content out there for operators. That's why we have our award that we launched last year as well. And so we wanted to create a space that we could bring operators specifically together to share their knowledge and experience. So the goal this season is to have 15 to 20 minute conversations with operators to share their experience, share things that they're learning, share wins and losses, things that could just lift other operators and help everyone that's kind of fighting the same battle. So that was kind of the objective, and we're really excited about the direction this is going. We've got we already have probably a half a dozen episodes lined up with fantastic operators from different DSOs and group organizations. And we're really excited to be able to create this space for operators to connect and share. So that was kind of the objective of the rebrand. And we hope that this is something that genuinely brings people value and helps people be better operators. And so that's what we're here for. So that's why we wanted to start this first episode of this new rebrand with Jordan. Jordan, before we dive into the topic, just real quick, give our listeners a quick background of your experience in operations. And I think that speaks for itself why we would want to start with you.
Sure. It was a weird trajectory. I started at the front desk as patient coordinator at a large DSO, basically because I needed a job that was Monday through Friday and not heavy lifting because I hurt my back. And they're the first ones that hired me. So that's how I ended up in dental, just first in. And then, I'm ambitious, so quickly got promoted through practice admin, regional ops manager, and then director of ops. And then I got contacted by a recruiter who was looking for an analytics role. I thought that I didn't qualify for it at all, and I thought she was crazy. And then she sent me the job description, and it was basically a copy of my resume. Because they weren't looking for somebody who knew how to do everything coding-wise. They were looking for someone to help them with context for the operational stuff of why you want to see what you want to see. And it was a lot of M&A as well, so due diligence, like diving in to see if there's any weird billing practices going on. So I was going into their PMSs and all that stuff, and then ended up most recently, before I switched over to the dark side of vendors, in a role where I was director of product management over, it was just a fancy title for being over analytics, BI, but it was more on the product side because we were tech heavy and building other things besides the warehouse. So, and then I ended up here. Lucky me.
We are thrilled and lucky to have Jordan at Kolla. But I just wanted to start with that because as many operators do, right? They've started in the front lines at a practice, kind of worked their way up. They have a lot of experience. They've seen many different sides of the practice, and Jordan has done just that, and excelled in a lot of them, in all those roles, and excelled, to the point that, as she mentioned, has led regions. And one of the unique things about Jordan is her. Can we call you a data nerd? I think you're a self-proclaimed data nerd, right? Her love for data, and self-taught how to code, how to query. So she has the operational know-how, within the office, but then knows how to pull out the numbers to tell the right stories, which is a super unique skill set, and something that I thought would be awesome to share in our first episode, because we talked to a lot of group practices that are, in their infancy of starting with a data warehouse, starting to get custom analytics, and starting to think through some of those data points to tell the stories that they're wanting to tell. And oftentimes don't know where to begin, because now they have all this freedom with their data that they've never had before. They've kind of gone off of the cookie cutter reports, so to speak, but now they have a data warehouse. So our topic today that we're going to discuss and share some of these best practices around is what to build first, right? So prioritizing reports in your data warehouse. So you've got all this data, you finally have the ability to build whatever you want. How do you know what to do? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So yeah, welcome back to Jordan. We're grateful that she's here, and excited to be able to share some of this knowledge with everybody. So Jordan, let's dive in. Do you want to give a little bit more context around this topic that you helped us come up with, and maybe some of the things that brought that idea to your mind as you and I discussed that?
Yeah, I just think that a lot of groups don't understand the gravity that comes with having your own warehouse and access to your own data. A lot of groups go for the low-hanging fruit, which is the analytics platform out of the box, because it's easier. You don't need a team to support it. But as a lot of groups are realizing now, when data warehousing is becoming more common, is it doesn't answer all the questions that you have, and it's not truly analytics. It's just some numbers on the card or a bar chart, and it doesn't actually show you, like, for me, analytics should tell a story. I should be able to gain some sort of insight from the visuals, which isn't always the case. I mean, like, some are going to be like, okay, new patients, you had 20 new patients this month and 30 last month. What happened? That kind of stuff. But I think the majority of it currently is, I don't know, like after the fact stuff. It's not stuff you can help project. So there's not a lot of projection going on, not a lot of forecasting going on, not a lot of predictive analytics going on. So I think that people aren't aware of what you can do with that stuff, because they think that's just what's available, just like the analytics, the typical, like, I don't know, main 3 or 4 that they have. But as groups bring in acquisitions and they get all these legacy systems, there's not really one analytics platform that services all of the PMSs. So I've seen a lot of larger groups that have, many PMSs not be able to use one solution. They have to, like, kind of piecemeal together, like, okay, this one covers these softwares and this one integrates with these softwares. And so it's still disparate. So
what do you typically see happen when a group decides they're going, they need something more than this typical analytics software that's out there, and they get a data warehouse set up? What do you see happen immediately after that initial implementation?
Building exactly the same thing as they just had. But yeah, that, and then you get, which, I mean, it's helpful because then it replaces the workflows and keeps everything the same to begin with. And then, just in my personal experience, I get an influx of 100 requests from different departments of all the requests they want and why those reports are number one priority. You get about 25 number one priorities. But yeah, typically it's like they need to be led in a certain direction, like kind of like consulting services, to say, okay, what problems are you trying to solve? What were you missing in your analytics platform before? So kind of just like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But
So
usually,
they
build what they had before.
How do you go from that to helping them decide what should come first? Because I've seen it too, where I always joke about, you give a mouse a cookie, right? They see, oh man, I can do so many things now. So you get 100 requests, 25 number one priorities. You're the operator, you're the person in charge of this, and you're trying to set a tone for what this is going to look like in the future and figuring out what is most important. So what would you say, or what advice would you give people from your experience on how they can decide what comes first?
Well, number one, what comes first is building whatever you had before. Like I said, it's because you don't want to disrupt the workflows. If you had an analytics platform, if you didn't, then the answer is different. But if you had an analytics platform before, you want to make it at least similar to what you had before so that you can not disrupt the workflows in the offices. They want to see exactly, you have to build trust with the analytics platforms, like your own custom ones, because everyone says, oh, the data is wrong all the time, but past that, once you get like their workflows in place, you're actually replacing it and giving them exactly what they had before or close to it. Then I always recommend that you do either something that would be good to have automated that would take manual work out of it. So you're freeing up people's time, like people on the FP&A teams in finance are doing all of this manually to do like revenue recognition and put together P&Ls, and they're having to do all this manually. And if you have multiple PMSs, even if you have the same PMS at like 30 locations, but it's like an on-prem one that they're not sharing servers on, that's still what I consider disparate. So it's like you still have to pull in 30 locations worth of stuff. So it gets really overwhelming. So a lot of that is like, okay, the first thing I do is make sure that anything that can be automated is, like at one of my last roles, one of the big reports that we gave to the PE firm, right, is like this huge thing that has all kinds of KPIs on it that they want to see, but there's like 30 of them. And it takes, I don't know, hours and hours and hours for multiple people at one time to build this. And then you have to put it all together in one place. And so I was able to automate that into a Power BI dashboard where it pulled it all together for them and just had it. It was the same format, just like a matrix, but it had all the stuff they needed, and you can adjust the date ranges ad hoc and not have to worry about, okay, well, we need a different year, so we have to go back and pull all that manually again, or rely on the office managers to submit the information correctly. So automation's a big deal because that makes a big difference right up front. And if there aren't any automation issues, which is not common, but if there aren't, then I always recommend going for whatever, like if you have a strategic goal that you've set for this year and you're trying to build one specific thing, think about what you can do to make a metric around that thing.
So kind of rewinding, unpacking that. So start with what you had previously. Make sure that you're not disrupting the previous workflows. Then the second piece, kind of what I heard, is like find some of that low-hanging fruit so that you can make an immediate impact, like things that are super manual, things that are very time-consuming. Are there things that you could build and get traction right out of the gates with your data warehouse? And then make sure that you focus with like the bigger goals in mind. Identify those projects that are maybe goals for the entire year or something, not just like one-off requests that some person on the executive team asks for, but try to identify those reports that align with those larger goals and prioritize things in that order. Does that sound?
Yeah, like if you're trying to like build up your implant cases or your all-on-4s, like making metrics that track that specifically, so you can see how that's going specifically, which is not something you typically would see in a cookie cutter out of the box analytics platform. It might have like some reports or some visuals that go by code, but it's not as like honed in and narrowed as you could do with the data warehouse and creating your own visuals. And then also one thing that I skipped over is standardization, not PMS too, but standardization of how you track things. If you want to track referrals, for example, like you have to have standardized definitions of what the referrals are across the board, and you can't do any analytics with data that doesn't make sense. So I posted about this recently on LinkedIn, but if you have, people entering random stuff all the time for referrals, for example, so like, how do you find our practice? There's like internet, Google search, Google reviews, blah, 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 but it's like all technically internet search, Google, whatever. And then word of mouth, you'll see like patient referral, person in the park, mom group, whatever, but it's still word of mouth. And so that needs to be narrowed down and standardized into that, or else it doesn't actually show you any insight. It just gives you some weird things that you have to then decipher yourself. So with the analytics, like the warehouse, you can actually code that in where it puts all of those categories into one so that you don't have to keep worrying about it.
Yeah.
And it gives you more insightful information instead of just whatever's put in there. Free text.
What advice would you give some people that have that already have a warehouse? They're getting a lot of requests. How would you advise them to handle those requests, keeping track of them, prioritizing them, et cetera? What kind of advice would you give them?
Keeping track of them, you need some sort of way of tracking them. I personally like software, so you can put something like ticketing wise in, or even just tracking it in a spreadsheet, I guess, if you need to, but just making sure that everything gets tracked. And so you can see who did the request, when it was submitted, and then like as much detail as possible, because people tend to ask for, something high level vague, and then you have to do a lot of, okay, well, why do you want to see this? But I think the number one mistake that people in my role had, that I've heard stories about, and I made it one time too. One of the biggest mistakes is just saying, okay, I'll do that, instead of like understanding the why behind it. Because there was one time where I was about to write this huge report that would have taken me like a month to really get through and get in depth, because they asked for, they wanted to know like counts per procedure code, which is like procedure mix, which is good when you're looking at like due diligence and you're trying to see like what you're buying, like what kind of mix that doctor does or whatever. But it doesn't really make sense to track, like as an operator, when you're doing it, it doesn't really make sense to track specific things like that. So I was trying to push back a little bit to figure out, what are you trying to get to? Like, what's the end goal you're trying to find out? If it's just like how many you do per code, then sure. But the actual thing the person was trying to figure out was like how much hygiene, how much oral surgery, all this stuff. But what they didn't understand, because that particular group didn't have a lot of dental background, they came from like finance and hospital and stuff like that, is that what they actually meant was like line of business, because they don't understand that there's hygiene codes that overlap with perio, and there's perio and OS that overlap. And so looking at it by code doesn't give you that answer. So if I had built that report out without asking that question, they'd be making business decisions based on very false information. So I think it's important to understand the why behind things before it just gets built. And then as far as prioritization is concerned, I like to have like a head-to-head meeting with people to be like, okay, I have 5 quote unquote number one priorities. Let's get the 5 of you in a room and talk about what the actual priority is, because people say it's like number one priority without realizing what else is on the table. And so if they know everything that's on the table and you're sharing it, then it's a little bit easier for people to say, okay, this is like high priority, but not number one. And so I think also transparency of what the requests are. I'm a fan of having like a backlog board essentially, so people can scroll through and see the prioritization. But at least transparency on what's being asked of everyone, because a lot of people just internalize it, especially like overachievers who are like, I want to say yes to everything, right? You want to tell everybody yes, and you want to do it because you want to make people happy, but that's not actually going to make anyone happy, because you're going to, like, at least yourself, you're going to be working, 14-hour days and still be asked like, why isn't this done yet? And you're like, because what you're asking is like a 6-week project.
The word that comes to my mind as you're talking about that is be curious, like curiosity. I feel like what you're saying is, as you get requests, make sure that you're very curious about understanding what they're actually asking for, the why behind it, what it is. And then as you get 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 requests, continue to be curious. And I love what you said about bringing people into a conversation with each other, because you see that in a lot of in project management, where different people have different goals. They think what they're doing is the most important, and they're oblivious to something else that's happening over here. But then once they also are curious and they understand what's happening inside the organization, then they realize like, oh yeah, that's more important, I'll wait, right? So I love that that attitude of just seeking to understand from each request and also across the organization, creating that culture of curiosity to make sure that we're telling the right stories and prioritizing the right things.
Yeah, if you're in charge of it, you got to be able to push back. You have to have the backbone to say, that's not really going to happen right now, and explain why. Like, I think a lot of it's just education, because people don't understand that there's 55 other things being asked to do, and it's like you're saying, like prioritization, it's more important, but explaining why it's more important too. Like, you're like, hey, I'm going to validate your feelings. Like, what you're asking for is great. However, that's not going to move the needle on any ROI right now. So what we're trying to do is tackle things that actually affect the numbers and or free people up to do other things. And what you're asking for is great, and it will help in the long run, but this is going to cause, like, this specific project is going to help immediately versus yours that's going to take like 6 months to ramp up to. So
Jake, I want to point out, like, I think, some of the people who listen here don't have, a lot of DSOs even, especially emerging DSOs, don't even have data warehouses at all. And so when they're hearing about these problems, they're probably like, what are they talking about? I think what I want to point out here is this is what will happen once you get a data warehouse and you realize that you can actually like look at whatever you want. All of a sudden the executive team's like, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And all of a sudden you're like, it's amazing the freedom that you get from it. But then as the data practitioner or the business intelligence person or data analyst that you have on your team, the problems will stack up because it gets really exciting on what you can get. And so the problems Jordan's talking about specifically for data analysts or business intelligence people, I think are awesome. Hopefully we have some of those people. There's not many of them, right, Jordan, that are dental experts and analysts, but hopefully we have some that will listen to this and get some advice out of it.
So I love that call out, Clinton. I appreciate that, because you're right. There's probably a lot of people that are still just given reports through some report software, and they've never even considered what else they can do. And so this is news. I do want to, as time kind of wraps up here, just touch on one more thing, Jordan. So addressing what Clint said, I think that on the flip side is the impact that you can have as a data analyst inside of the organization. Like, once you start building these things, it can really lift the organization to new heights, because they can start to really understand what things need to be improved, which things they should double down on, et cetera. So let's talk about turning these reports into action and how that changes the organization, how that can make it better, and then we'll wrap up after that.
Yeah, well, to Clint's point, for people who haven't had a data warehouse before, I think a lot of people don't understand what you can do with it. And so that's actually my favorite people to bring on here, is people who haven't had the opportunity to see a data warehouse and see what you can do with it. Because, like, basically, if there's anything in the PMS that you can see, you can get to it somehow, whether that's us adding more fields or whatever. But it exists somewhere and you can find it. So if you're, entering this thing over here, we can find it and make a report out of it. And I think that having access to the reports is interesting, because usually, even if the analytics company, if you're coming from like one of the softwares, like actual analytics softwares, they might have some of the information available, and you might be able to have, like, if you're a larger group, you can have them do custom work. They'll agree to do it, but you're at the mercy of their dev cycle. So you have to wait for them to write the reports for you. And that could be, I've been quoted, I don't know, like 4 to 6 weeks and like $8,000, or even longer sometimes, but they charge for it too. Whereas if you have access to your own data, which you should, just to be clear, like, it is your data, you have it, you should be able to look at it yourself. But if you want to look into something, you have a hunch, and you just want to say, like, I want to see if my hunch means anything. Like, I think that this might be down because of X, Y, and Z. Like, maybe the doctor days went down. You can look at that immediately. If you have somebody on your team who knows how to do queries and actually, like, pull the information, you have immediate access to that versus having to wait a very long time to get it. And possibly having to pay for it. And then it may not even be, that's the first iteration, so it may not even be what you wanted. And then now you have to wait another 4 to 6 weeks or however many weeks to go through it. So I think it also like shortens the overall process, and you get to ask a lot more questions. And I feel like when there's a long dev process and a high cost involved, you stop asking for as much stuff as you really need or want, because you're like weighing out, okay, like I don't even know if this is going to have an impact, and I don't really want to pay to find out. So when you have your own stuff, you can do unlimited. The world's your oyster, and I don't think a lot of people understand how much stuff you can do with a data warehouse. It's wild.
One thing I just saw one customer doing on their own, this is the first time I've seen a customer on their own with data warehousing do, is they actually pulled in their marketing data into the data warehouse with the practice management data. And so what they were doing is they're tracking the effectiveness of their advertising. I think we've talked about that metric before, Jake, on earlier episodes, but this one was like in the wild, one of our customers, and they're actually doing it. And so they would say, okay, here's all our leads, and how, they would go match it up to the practice management data to see how many of the leads turned into patients and how much money was brought in by every one of those ad campaigns, so they can compare the effectiveness of them. That's just like one quick example of something that a data warehouse you can do that you can't do with basically any other classical or off-the-shelf dental analytics product, because they only have practice management data.
And to build on that, so a lot of groups do that, but they do manual matchbacks where they have to like check it, an export that their marketing company gives them against their data in the PMS, and it's very manual and it takes a lot of time. So you touched on that already, but another step is if you get your phone analytics put in there as well, not just like calls and stuff like that, but actually like the analytics for the voice, you can actually find out like real conversions. Because if you did a campaign and you're looking at when people scheduled and how their appointment, that doesn't really tell the whole story. So if you have the call analytics of when they actually called, how the call went, like maybe they called in immediately as soon as they saw the ad, and then they couldn't get scheduled for 3 months. It's not that, and then it looks like your campaign's not doing well because you're not looking at the lag time. So like having all those pieces together, like the more information you get, the more accurate you can really track those things. And yeah, like exactly like you said, if you bring in more data sources and you can still tie them into the PMS data, I think that's where it starts differentiating from just analytics platforms out of the box. Is like, cool, you can do your reports and it's all customizable and all that stuff. But when you start bringing in other data sources, whether that's a huge one that I got asked about a lot, was bringing in like HR data and hours from like ADP or something, because they want to track like actual like chair economics of like employees, like how much they're spending and where the overtime is, and if it actually is translating into extra production, and that kind of stuff. Like that is a huge one that like, because usually it's like PE firms want to know that, right? So you have like all these different interests of who wants what information, but some of it gets really cool. And then when you start looking at like appointment trends, you can start doing really cool predictive analytics and bring in, this is like pie in the sky, but something I've always been interested in doing is like bringing in weather data. Like what happened on that day when it was so low? Okay, it was a snow day. They didn't have that day. No one showed up because it was snowing. So like if you tie in like little stuff like that, that's like, a nice to have later down the road, not a must have, but it's really cool stuff that I get really excited about that you can do. It's like, you don't think about that stuff. You're like, okay, now I can bring in this really cool information that you can use like Google API to bring in.
See, now we can all see why Jordan is a self-proclaimed data nerd. She's ready to overlay PMS data with weather patterns to be able to predict if people are going to show up for their appointments. See, it's so cool. So anyways, we hope that this is insightful to a lot of you, whether you have a warehouse, maybe there are some insights that you could take from this, whether you don't have one and you're curious what they are. But at the end of the day, hopefully there was something in here that helped you learn about prioritizing these reports and things when you do get a warehouse stood up, and also maybe learn something about what are some of the benefits of standing up a data warehouse in your organization. So Jordan, we will finish this. Final thoughts. You've shared a lot of good stuff, so I'm not going to force you to have final thoughts, but do you have any final words before we wrap this up today?
Just reiterating that the best you can do standardizing wise of like adjustments, referral sources, like get rid of whatever free text fields you can, because it really messes up the data. Like, I know that when people start practices, they're not thinking about the future sale they're going to do and their future data warehouse. But standardize it, and your future analytics leader will thank you, and it'll be a lot easier to actually gain insights, and you'll have to do less operational changes to get to the point you need. So I've had a lot of people come in and it's like, okay, I want to get to this end goal, and it's like, all right, well, that data is not useful right now, and I'm going to need you to completely overhaul everything you're doing operationally to make this work. And if you're asking for a custom report, I need to know where you're currently getting it. And a lot of requests come from a place of like, we don't have it yet, but I want to find it. And that's great. But also we need to know how do we QA that?
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Jordan, for giving us some time today. We haven't really asked people to promote this podcast because, we were learning ourselves, and we feel really confident about this niche that we want to really support. So if you don't mind, those that are listening, subscribe to our stuff, share, ask other operators to come and join our little community. And let's see if we can create something that becomes really beneficial for all the operators out there. So subscribe, and follow us, and we will see you all on episode 2 of season 2 next week.